Greetings, everyone. Welcome to our exclusive Global Leading Voices webinar campaign. We are delighted to have you join us here today. Please be informed that if you have any questions during the presentation, you may type them into the question box in your control panel. The presenter will answer your questions at the end of the presentation accordingly. Now, without further ado, we will turn the time over to our presenter, who will begin shortly.
Hello and welcome, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Yetmir Yashari, and I will be your moderator for today's webinar, How to Build Organizational Resilience by Integrating ISO IEC 42001 and ISO IEC 27002. We're excited to discuss this topic with our speakers today, Nathalie, Claes, and Graham Parker. Before we get started, I'd like to inform the audience that this session is being recorded and will be posted on our website and YouTube channel along with the slides of the presentation. Furthermore, we encourage you to participate by submitting your questions at any time using the Q&A feature in the chat box. Now, without further ado, let's get started. I'm going to hand it over to our first speaker, Nathalie.
Hi, everybody. As already introduced, my name is Nathalie Claes. I'm from Belgium. Already excited for Christmas, of course. Just a little bit of background information. I have over 20 years of experience in information security, mainly related on the governance aspects of that. I also have an own company in Belgium, which is called Dadir, and I support organizations by implementing ISO 27001, ISO 42001, and 9001 management systems. And on top of that, I also act as a CISO or DPO for organizations that don't have the bandwidth or the necessity to have a full-time role in place. And besides that, I'm also active as an external auditor for the standards that I've mentioned before. So I'm really excited to share a little bit of my experience on the topics of today.
Thank you, Nathalie, and some of you may know me already. I'm Graham Parker. I'm based in the UK, specifically the northeast of England, so probably the nearest city you'd recognise is the city of York. My background basically been in and around information security and cyber security mainly since around 1999-2000. Started life initially in IT support, moved into networking, and then got into security management with the health service in the UK. That's where I got introduced to BS 7799, the forerunner to ISO 27001. I've worked in various large consulting organisations, but since 2008, I've basically run my own company here in the UK, working with a lot of clients of all shapes and sizes on implementing various standards, including ISO 27001, PCI DSS, government standards, and NIST. And much more recently, of course, a little bit with 42001 as well. As well as doing that, I also teach with PCB. I teach quite a lot of the PCB courses and also work as a management system auditor as well. So again, a bit like Nathalie's mentioned, looking forward to hopefully sharing some of that information with you as we work our way through this.
Okay, so we've prepared a couple of slides that both Graham and myself will discuss about. So we balanced it, or we tried to balance it more or less equally. So looking at the agenda, we will be covering a couple of topics. So we will talk first a little bit about, okay, organizational resilience, what is meant with that. Then taking a little bit of a deep dive on ISO 42001 and the ISO standard 27002, explaining what are both the standards about. Then explaining a little bit about the relationship between the standards and the topics on integrated management systems. And Graham will then go deeper into detail on, okay, what are controls that are very similar in both of the standards, and how can you integrate those, and what are advantages of integrating those controls. In the end, we will foresee, I think we will have like 20 minutes, 15 minutes for you to ask your questions and for us to provide some answers. If the questions don't get responded to, all of them, because we're with a lot of people in the call, so it might be that we won't be able to adhere to all the questions, then we will answer them separately, and you will be able to find them either via email or they will be posted in the newsletter of PECB for you to find more details about that. So don't hesitate if anything is not clear, ask them in the chat, and after the presentation, both Graham and myself will take them into account, and we will try to provide you with an answer. So let's start with the first topic. So Graham is the master of slides. So Graham will be flipping to the PowerPoint presentation. So when looking at organizational resilience, if we look at the ISO standard 20002-316 version 2017, there is a definition on organizational resilience in there. So it's basically the ability to really anticipate, but also prepare, respond to, but also recover from disruptions and challenges. And in today's world that we live in, it's a topic that is more crucial than ever. So in that changing environment, it's very important that organizations have the ability to deliver the objectives that they have for their organization and to survive in those environments. So more resilient organizations can anticipate and respond to the threats and opportunities that arise from either sudden changes, but also gradual changes in both their internal and external context. Again, when looking at the political situation that we have here, there are a lot of messages going around nowadays that there might be some big changes coming our way. It is time for organizations to start thinking about that, and a lot of legislation, a lot of standards that are being produced now and that are being published talk about that organizational resilience and being prepared for what is to come, both suddenly or gradually. So enhancing that resilience can even be a strategic organizational goal and is effectively the outcome of good business practice, and it will help you to manage the risks that you see coming towards your organization. Of course, so the organizational resilience that is necessary for different types of organizations can differ. There is no maturity assessment or maturity level that you need to adhere to, and there's no absolute measure that you need to adhere to. So it's really influenced on what type of organization are you, what is the operational factors that you are considering, what is the environment that you are working to, and how does that external and internal organization work towards the organization that and the environment that you're working in. So looking at that organizational resilience, there are a couple of things that you need to take into account. Of course, risk management is a key aspect there, together with crisis management, having leadership that is really adaptive to make quick decisions and to provide that clear direction. And nothing is worse than having a leadership team that in a crisis situation has no clue how to react. But of course, also having that employee engagement and having that technology in place in order for you to react to those changes. And that links, of course, to business continuity planning and disaster recovery. Graham, I don't know if you want to add something.
Yeah, no, I think it was a good summary. And I think in the context of this webinar where we're talking about both AI and information/cyber security, I think many of us can recognise the resilience challenges that we have. In particular, there's a point you touched upon there, Nathalie, which is about legislation. Funny enough, I was just doing a talk this morning on the EU AI Act, and we were talking about other potential legislation that might appear and how some of the standards we're going to talk about in here, particularly 42001, whilst not guaranteeing legal compliance, can allow you to prepare for those changes, to have the right frameworks in place. So I think what we're about to talk about fits in quite nicely with that, and probably the bigger picture of digital trust and building confidence in information systems. But yeah, so that's the points I would add. Okay.
Now, let's have a look at the different standards. So first, ISO 42001, which is quite a new standard, which really specifies the requirement for both establishing implementing, maintaining, and obviously improving. And I find it a very difficult acronym to pronounce, so I always pronounce it completely. So an AI management system within an organization. It follows the harmonized structure like you're used to all of the ISO standards. So it works through the clauses 4 until 10. So it has the same harmonized structure. And as, for example, the same as in an ISO 27001 or an ISO 9001, the requirements are expressed with the verb shall. So it is something that needs to be in place. And for this standard, you can also obtain certification. Now, looking for Belgium, I only know about one certification body that is already providing the certification, the certification against the standard. So again, since it's a very new standard, there's not a lot of certification bodies that are already providing the certification, but I'm really expecting it to take a leap in the coming years, also when the EU AI Act is becoming into play, moving towards 2026. I guess a lot of organizations will want to adhere to the ISO 42001 and providing that that legislative compliance towards that as well by using the ISO 42001 as well, because there is a huge overlap between the two. So it will definitely help with that. Looking at the, or Graham, if you want to add, feel free.
Sorry, yeah, again, I think pretty clear on everything you said there. I think it's the same story here in terms of only a small number of certification bodies are working towards accreditation. I'm currently working on an implementation project, so we are seeing interest, certainly in organisations that want to demonstrate. I guess you might want to call it trustworthy AI, but yeah, I'm anticipating as the EU AI Act comes into enforcement as we move towards 2026, I think this will become very relevant, because interestingly, in the EU AI Act, it does actually make reference to implementing a management system to manage AI risk. Now, it doesn't call out 42001, but this is the default management system for that. So I think that alone will be a very good driver.
Indeed. Now, looking at ISO 27001, specifies the requirements for establishing, implementing, maintaining, and improving an information security management system. I'm pretty sure everybody on the call is very known and acquainted with the standard. The standard is applicable for all types of organizations. It doesn't matter how big you are, what type of organization, what industry you are in. It's a very high-level standard. That's why I'm a big fan of the ISO 27001. I see within a lot of organizations, they feel it's more difficult because it's applicable to all the organizations, and that means that you need to do a little bit of thinking of your own on how you can apply it to your organization. But the standard itself can be applied to an organization of 10 or 5 people, but also to organizations that go up to 1,000, 2,000 or 5,000 FTE. And it doesn't matter what type of industry you're in. So that makes it a really valuable standard. The same as with ISO 42001, the requirements again are expressed with the verb shall. So it's something that needs to be in place, and to ISO 27001, you also see you're able to get a certification against that. In Belgium, when looking at some latest legislation and NIS2 directive, everybody is very well aware of that directive. In Belgium, the law specifies that when you obtain an ISO 27001 certificate for your full organizational scope, it gives basically the compliance check that you adhere to the NIS2. So I see in Belgium, for my customers, there is an increase of questions to get the ISO 27001 implemented and certified, because that helps with adhering, helps with the supply chain security as well, to give that reasonable assurance that you adhere to the NIS2. So that's another area where the law, the legislative bodies help with getting those management systems implemented and getting it out there as a best practice. Not sure if all the European countries will follow the same thing, but for Belgium, that is the case. Graham, not sure about the UK.
Yeah, similar story. I mean, in here it's much more driven, I think, commercially. So, particularly any organisation that wants to do business with government entities or the public sector that involves information processing, the vast majority of contracts now will require ISO 27001 certification. So we're still seeing a huge interest in the standard here because of that.
Yeah, indeed. Then moving forward to ISO 27002, which are the guidelines related to the Annex A controls of the ISO 27001. So it is not a prescriptive in nature. It doesn't tell you how you should be doing it. Normally, no auditor should take the ISO 27002 and check if you have implemented it the way it's been described there. But it's very useful as a guideline for you to use in the organization to check, especially when you're not really sure, when you're having discussions with your internal IT, with your development team on, okay, what is meant with that specific control? Why was it set up in the first place? And what are ideas on how you could implement it in your organization? That can help to get basically that same reference line, that same line in the sand that you can start talking about. So clauses are therefore also not used with the verb shall, but should. So it's something that you should be thinking about, again, related to your specific contexts, related to the specific industry that you're active in. That's also why you cannot achieve a certification against this standard. So it's really an add-on to the ISO 27001. Especially with the new version, with the 2022 version of the standard. It's a pretty lengthy document. I have one printed out copy at home. I think it's over 200 pages. So it's pretty lengthy. It gives you a lot of useful information. And I also use it very much with my customers because especially when you're talking with very technical people, they all have their certain way of looking at things, which is often not the correct way of looking at things. So, but that gives you that common starting point to start a discussion and to find that common ground so that you can start implementing controls in a way that everybody in the organization feels comfortable about. It gives you basically the best practice where you then can have a look on, okay, what is best for our organization and how can we implement it. So I use it very much. So it gives a lot of useful background as well for my customers that don't necessarily have that ISO standard common body of knowledge to work with. It gives really that practical information that comes into hand within organizations. Graham?
Yeah, I think what's also probably worth explaining as well, especially with the way 42001 works, is the way I like to describe this is when you look in Annex A of ISO 27001, and in there you see the 93 security controls. Often those security controls are described at a very high level. So if we just randomly pick on A 5.7 on threat intelligence, when you read that in Annex A of ISO 27001, you're going to get basically one or two sentences, and you might be thinking to yourself, well, okay, how am I going to practically, as Nathalie was saying, implement that? Then in ISO 27002, I can go to the same number, 5.7, and look up threat intelligence and find a lot more information. So the way I sort of explain this to people is it goes hand in hand with 27001. Now, what has that got to do with ISO 42001? Well, 42001 works in a similar way. So 42001 has its Annex A, but it doesn't have a 42002. Its 42002 is Annex B. So in 42001, Annex B is like the 27002 of the AI world, if you like, and that will make more sense in a little while when what I'm going to do is take you through an overlap between some of the controls we see in Annex A of 27001 and 27002. And annexes A and B of 42001. So yeah, as Nathalie's already said, it gives you the detail that you need to actually go away and implement things from a practical perspective.
Okay, so we've given a little bit of background on the different standards. So how do they now go hand in hand? We first need to give a little bit of background on what is a management system. So if we look at the definition, and if you followed a training course with PECB on either one of the management system courses, you will find that definition everywhere. So it's basically a set of interrelated elements of an organization to establish policies and objectives, as well as the processes to achieve those objectives, which is a very complicated sentence to really explain that organizations, and I usually make the comparison with a human or a living organism. It's a system that works together. It's like a machine with different elements that need to work together to deliver the outcome of what the goal of the organization is. So there's no such thing as an organization that does not have a management system. The management systems are usually in place. They're not always called an ISO management system or an information security management system, but organizations have either formally or informally a way of working, a way of operating in a way that they deliver their products and their services. So of course, when looking at a certified management system, and you're looking at a management system that is coherent, that is functioning, that has processes, procedures, resources, tools, people that work together to make sure that the organization delivers in the most efficient way the services and the products to their customers. So, of course, as I already stated, some organizations have a very formal management system. You see that a lot in very large organizations that already have a lifespan of 20 or 30 years. They're pretty mature in their existence. They have a lot of formalized processes, and usually they need that because they've grown in population. They need more formal decision processes, and they need to have formal approvals. Where you look at a startup, for example, chaos is basically their way of being, while implementing their very formal management system will most likely go against the nature of a startup. So that's also where you get that little bit of friction, especially when a startup wants to get a certified management system. You always get that friction on trying to get them in a little bit more of a formal way. So it depends really on how formal you need to have it. Of course, again, a documentation, as we all know, when you have a management system in place, having a certain level of documentation is necessary. Again, you have to look at your organization, at the context that your organization is working in, on very specific legislative requirements that you might have, like, okay, how do you want to retain, how long do you need to retain certain knowledge, certain documents, but you also want to capture that knowledge within organizations. Again, in startups, in young organizations, people, usually the knowledge is situated in the heads of people, which is great, but you also want to ensure, again, referring to that organizational resilience, you want to ensure that the knowledge that you've built up, that if people leave the organization, win the lottery, or have something else where they won't be able to work for the organization anymore, you want to ensure that you keep that knowledge within the organization. Again, looking at a management system, it's not something that you set up once and that you don't have to look at anymore. I know a lot of organizations think like that about an ISO or an ISMS or a QMS. It's something that they set up, and then having the annual review or the frequent review is sometimes challenging. However, it should be something that is really incorporated in the DNA of the organization and that changes together with the organization. So it needs to be adaptive and agile and responsive in nature, so that it changes together with the organization. And referring back to the documentation requirements, I think the time that when I started 25 years ago, we had those quality management systems where you had that like 100 binders with all the processes and procedures, and everybody had to walk through all the papers. I think we moved away from that, where I'm not saying that you don't need to have the documentation, but it's becoming more agile and really, okay, what brings added value towards the organization? Documentation shouldn't be a goal in itself, but should be providing that added value to the organization. So that makes it a little bit more flexible towards the organization. Graham?
Yeah, I think you've hit all the points there, Nathalie. It just kind of maybe laughed a little bit. It reminded me, if anybody's been on a course, you might have heard this story before. It reminded me of a situation where I was helping a client implement at that time an ISMS, and they needed to have it implemented by a certain date for contractual reasons. And I remember one of the senior managers coming to me and saying, that date's coming up, where's my ISMS? As if it was kind of like a product or something that I could hand to him. And I kind of had to explain exactly what you've done there, which is, yes, there are documents, I can show you all of that, but a management system isn't a product I can just hand to you. It is essentially, as you've already alluded to, a way of working. So yeah, that discussion always reminds me of that conversation I had with that individual. But very cultural, for sure.
For sure. So ISO and ISO standards have made a shift towards creating those harmonized structure, which allows organizations to create integrated management systems. Looking back again 20 years, and every time I say that, I think, oh, I'm getting old, but I'm not getting into that discussion. Looking at the integrated management systems, and the goal of having that harmonized structure is basically to make the lives of organizations easier in giving them that same structure. So if you look at an ISO 9001 coming from 2015, the same for ISO 40001, but you see it also in 42001. If you look at leadership and commitment, you basically find the same clauses in 5.1, and the text is the same, the requirements are the same. So if you set it up once, you can set it up for all the management systems that you want to incorporate in your organizations. Of course, the leadership and commitment is a pretty common one. If we go to policies, the information security policy, the artificial intelligence use policy is referred to in clause 5.2. Obviously, the policy needs to be different related to the specific topic, but the requirements that are related to the policy are the same across all the standards. We see the same thing for objectives, the same for documented information. For internal audit, the same requirements, also the same for management review. The only thing that's a little bit different is on the continual improvement, and it's only related to the numbering. And so you see for ISO 9001, the clause related to continual improvement is 10.3, while in ISO 27001, for example, it's clause 10.1. But again, the text that is stated in that clause is identical. So the process that you can put in place to continually improve your management system, your integrated management system, can be used across all the standards that you have in the organization. And that saves you a lot of time in the organization, where you don't need to have, if you have an organization that has, for example, a quality management system, an information security management system, an environmental management system, and also decides to do an artificial intelligence management system. In the past, you would have 4 management systems next to each other, and you would probably have also the number of people in those management systems doing kind of the same work, but not completely. That area has been simplified over the years, where you can now really combine it in one management system and synchronize basically across the organization, which helps you enforcing the requirements out of the standard towards the organization, because everybody in the organization understands it's about the same concept, the same requirements that are requested from the organization. So it's a huge added value having those integrated management systems. Moving on, I also see in auditing firms and certifying bodies, it's becoming more common that auditors are allowed to audit the management systems as a full integrated management system. And in the past, you had auditors that had to do the 9001 separately from the 27001. So you were answering the same question twice, but once for information security and one for quality. Now you see a lot of certifying bodies moving towards that integrated management system, getting also one report, giving you that feedback on how your management system as a whole is working and supporting your organization, which I think is a true added value for organizations. That again, I don't know what your experience is, Graham.
Yeah, I think the efficiency one is the key one. Maybe a sort of an example. So I'm currently or have been working with a SaaS provider, a software as a service provider. They have basically, let's say, a machine learning driven product that their clients can use for research purposes. So far, they decided to implement ISO 27001, obviously to demonstrate to their customers their commitment to information security. And they also, at the time I worked with them, they implemented 22301 because they wanted to demonstrate resilience for the solution. So at the time, they had a management system which, without sort of quoting it directly, the scope was the design, development and maintenance of XYZ, we just call it that, SaaS product, right? So they've got this, they've implemented that joint management system, they have one certification audit covering the two standards, one internal audit process, one management review. This year, because of the launch of 42001, and given that they're doing machine learning as part of their product anyway, we are now working on extending that management system to include 42001. And really, the bulk of the work there is not in this area where we've got these things pretty well defined. The work is really on the controls in the annex, which I'll be coming to very shortly. So for an organization like that, if you get the scope right, you can drive a lot of efficiency, reduce a lot of overlap, as Nathalie's kind of alluded to.
Yeah, indeed. So when we look at the definition of an artificial intelligence management system, again, looking back at the definition of a management system, an artificial intelligence management system is that set of interrelated or interactive elements of an organization that helps you establish the policies and objectives, as well as the processes to achieve those objectives in relation to really that responsible development, provision or use of artificial intelligence systems. So it's really focused, as is the EU AI Act, in, okay, how can we use those artificial intelligence systems in a very responsible, transparent, ethically responsible way. And the ISO 42001 really outlines those requirements. And again, as Graham already referred to in the annexes, it gives that guidance on how you should think about implementing and maintaining and improving that artificial intelligence management system, again, tailored to the organization's context. So it really gives you the oversight, the high-level management system itself, but it also gives you the guidelines on how you need to think about it and how you can implement it in a practical way. Graham?
Yeah, I think all those are excellent points, and we'll explore the annex very, very soon as well, some parts of it very soon as well.
Yeah. And then if you look at an artificial intelligence management system, if you integrate it with a couple of other management systems, it will give you a lot of added value. If you look at the ISO 27001, which focuses on information security controls and information security aspects, it will help you basically, or it enables organizations to look at the security objectives and leveraging that high-level structure for the integrated implementation and gaining those significant benefits. Obviously, implementing, using, developing artificial intelligence systems goes really hand in hand with information security controls that you need to have in place to provide that responsible behavior. So having those integrated gives you a lot of additional value. The same goes for 27701, which is the ISO standard, which really focuses on privacy-related obligations. It aligns that privacy-related objectives and control, again, very important with the use of artificial intelligence on what personal data, what data are you putting in the artificial intelligence system? Where is the data captured? How is it set up? How can people execute their rights and so forth? So it's looking both to the external requirements, but also looking at the internal policy. And then last, but certainly not least, also ISO 9001 are looking at quality, ensuring that it gives the customers really that confidence on using an artificial intelligence system that looks at risk management, software development, supply chain coherence, ensuring that customers can have that confidence that organizations look in a structured way in ensuring that the process delivers the same outcomes time and time again. So having a combination of those 4 management systems gives you a really end-to-end look at implementing artificial intelligence in a coherent, in a transparent and very objective way within the organization. Graham?
Yep. I think those are all valid points. In other words, these are the ones that lend themselves well to being integrated, because when you look at ISO 42001 and the topics it focuses on various things such as fairness and transparency, ethical use, but of course security and privacy are very much at the heart of that as well. So hence the good overlap there. So one of the things I was going to discuss here then, which I think that, when we look at the title of this presentation, which is all about explaining how we can use both of these standards together, Natalie's there talked you through sort of looking at the management system side of things. But if we actually get under the hood as well in the controls, there is a certain level of mapping between them. So remember we said that in ISO 42001, we have our Annex A. It actually goes from A2 to A10, and in those areas there's various different controls you can implement to have a reasonable assurance that you have what ISO would call responsible AI, in covering a multitude of topics. What I've tried to do is have a look at, well, what's in there in the annex, and how does that map across to the Annex A of ISO 27001? Or more to the point, the ISO 27002 controls. And we can see 4 key areas, and my plan is to just take you through these and explain them. So in ISO 42001, there is 2 or 3 requirements to deal with concerns and incidents. So concerns in the AI world don't necessarily mean security incidents. They could be any concern. So for example, let's say I'm a user of an AI solution, and I believe that the output, for example, is biased or incorrect or inaccurate. That might be a concern that I have. And what the standard says is there shall be a mechanism where I could go and raise that concern. Equally, the concern might be from your customer or your partner. Equally, an incident in 42001 might be a security incident, but it could also be again, a catastrophic failure of a system giving a completely incorrect results. I'd say we've got a medical system that gives a doctor a medical diagnosis, and the system gets it significantly wrong, or I've designed AI for an automated vehicle and it makes a bad decision and crashes. Those would be incidents. The point is, in both 42001 and 27001, we have a series of requirements around managing incidents and concerns. And again, we'll go into those in a bit more depth in a minute. Similarly, when we look at ISO 27001 and 2, we have this control in there at 8.6 on capacity management. Now, back in the day with traditional IT, capacity management was all about planning, looking and saying, how many users are we going to have? Do we have enough network bandwidth, disk space, CPU usage, etc. Possibly proactively monitoring that, reacting before we hit certain thresholds. Now, I realize a lot of that can be automated today in cloud computing, but the point is we still have that requirement to think about the resources we need to run the system in a successful and, could argue, resilient manner. We're avoiding disruptions and outages. And equally, in ISO 42001, we have a similar set of requirements in A4, as we'll see in a moment, that talk all about ensuring we have adequate capacity management in place. The other thing we see in ISO 42001, probably the most interesting, well, they're all interesting, let's put it that way, but one of the most interesting ones to me is honing in on what we call the development lifecycle. So that is to say the software development lifecycle. Now, ISO 42001 is concerned in A6 with making sure that at every stage of a software development, right from the initiation of a project through to the retirement of a system, that we think about responsible AI at each stage, that we embed controls at each stage. Equally, ISO 27001 has the same concerns, obviously purely through a security lens, but they're there as well. They can map as well. And last but not least, if we think about building an AI solution, the chances of you building an AI solution on your own as an organization and not being reliant on a supplier or a series of suppliers is very, very, very unlikely. And therefore, A10.3, as we'll see shortly in the standard talks, speaks to supply chain management. You're doing our due diligence on suppliers, having proper agreements in place with our suppliers, including cloud providers where necessary. All of those good things that we also see in ISO 27001. So the argument I'll try and build here as I go through these is that if you've got an ISO 27001 ISMS, like the client I'm speaking of, who are now looking to extend that to 42001, I'm not arguing it's job done already. But what I'm saying is there are certain aspects of what's required in the controls of 42001 already being addressed. So these map very, very well. And with a little bit of extra work, you could build a set of processes that address both the AI and security controls in one wrapper. And that's what I'm going to, over the next few slides, try and take you through these in a bit more detail. So Nathalie, I don't know if you want to add to that.
No, I'm fine, thank you.
Okay, so let's have a bit of a walkthrough. So if you've been on the 42001 course, you might recognize some of the slides, but I'm only using them as a sort of a bit of a talking point, as I alluded to already. So when we look at one of them, I've already mentioned it a moment ago, reporting of concerns. So I think it's very important to talk about two things. The internal organization and then the external organization. So if I think internally, here we see a control. The organization shall define and put in place a process to report concerns about the organization's role with respect to an AI system throughout its life cycle. So as I say, a concern is not necessarily an incident. A concern might be, a perceived problem, but what we're saying is the organization shall have a reporting mechanism. If in ISO 27001, you already have reporting mechanisms to report vulnerabilities, to report security concerns, we may be able to expand that existing process to cover the reporting of AI-related concerns. Another thing we do when we think about reporting in ISO 27001, let's imagine in ISO 27001 you have an information security incident or even a near miss. You might need to report those things to people like regulators. You might need to report those to your customers, for example. You're going to need to have an external reporting process. And equally, you're also going to want external entities, so customers, business partners, sorry. You want to enable them to be able to report incidents to you. So again, you should usually, when you've got an ISMS in place, already be dealing with external reporting. In 42001, we broaden the definition of reporting, but basically, as we can see here, that any interested party should be able to report an adverse impact. An adverse impact could be a security breach, but equally an adverse impact could be, as I was alluding to a little bit earlier, an actual poor output from an AI system, poor decision, some kind of bias that's been detected, etc. So again, why not tie in the reporting into your current security incident reporting process? And just sticking with that topic before we look at another one, again, if you have your ISMS set up and you are going to communicate these incidents that we've been talking about to your users, to your regulators, to your business partners, usually you'll do that in a planned manner. You'd usually have an incident response plan, and it would clearly lay out the circumstances under which certain communication must happen, when certain events need to be escalated, who needs to make those decisions. Well, again, ISO 42001 says we shall have the same thing. In this case, for users, we can see it here. The organization shall determine and document a plan for communicating incidents to the users of the AI system. So if I've already got a plan for communicating information security incidents, can I potentially broaden that to also communicate wider AI-related incidents. So before I go to the next one, I just want to, Nathalie, do you want to sort of comment on incidents reporting, any of those particular points?
No, I think you've covered everything very completely.
Yeah. All right. So the other area then, so we said there was 4 areas, didn't we, altogether? If we look here at A4 and A4.2 of 40/2001 Annex A, it talks about resource documentation. And the objective, as you can see, as it says at the top for these particular controls, are to make sure that all the resources required to fully run and understand and operate and manage risk of an AI system are understood. Now, I've only took one of these. There's several of them. I've looked at resource documentation. But basically, what do we mean by the organisation shall identify and document relevant resources? Well, relevant resources to run and operate successfully in a resilient manner an AI system can be human resources, the people you're going to need to develop, build, run, operate the system. The technical resources in terms of cloud environments, networks, network bandwidth, processing power, etc. It could be the financial resources required to support that system throughout its entire life cycle. So remember, that's from initiation right through to essentially retirement. And again, we can map that. So if you're already doing the good stuff that we see in ISO 27001, such as professional capacity management, configuration management, you're practicing a lot of those disciplines, then the likelihood is you're probably doing a lot of this stuff already. So again, we can see those good practices, if you want to call it, in ISO 27001 overlapping. That's why actually, when not to complicate things even further, when I often talk to people about these standards, I sometimes talk to them about IT service management, because what I tell people is if you get your basics right when it comes to IT service management, that is to say proper capacity management, config management, release management, so proper project management processes in place. If you can get those basic pillars in place, then actually implementing something like 27001 and 42001 becomes so much easier. So the other area, though, that is probably the biggest in here in terms of its overlap with 27001 Annex A and 27002 is that around the system development life cycle. So when we look at it from a 42001 point of view, we have an objective here for this entire section, that the organisation shall identifies and documents objectives and implements processes for the responsible design and development of AI systems. So what do we mean by responsible design and development? What we mean by this is responsible design and development is all about making sure that we build and operate AI systems that meet our key objectives. So that will include, when we think about responsible, some of the key principles of responsible AI, like ethics. Are we going to build something that's ethical, as free from bias as we possibly can, that protects the privacy and the rights and freedoms of individuals, that implements adequate security, etc. So in other words, if that's going to happen at all stages of our AI life cycle, we need to do something at the start, documenting those objectives, actually laying out what are our aims to produce responsible AI systems. And what we're aiming to do is embed those aims into the software development life cycle. So what does that mean? It means that in every phase of the life cycle, as you'll see over the next few slides, at the design and development phase, we want to be baking in those requirements right at the beginning. In the phase where we develop systems, we want to ensure that our engineers, our systems developers are embedding those controls, that they're being tested and so on and so forth, just like you would with security. Again, as many of us know, we don't retrofit security controls into a system after we built it. We think about security from day one. We have system engineers in our teams who are security experts, who are overseeing, ensuring security requirements are captured, documented and defined. We have engineers who are there validating that our developers are developing in a secure manner. That we have testers to test whether those security requirements are being met. Those processes for many mature organizations already exist. So this is basically an extension to that, saying, well as security, are we thinking about the other objectives that we might have in those areas? And just to be clear, I realize that the way ISO presents this, it presents it very much as some people, when they've seen this, have said, oh, this looks like a waterfall development, because you're talking about an initiation phase, a design phase, develop and test. And yes, I am, but I'm doing that to try and explain what's going on. There's nothing to stop us having agile development, incremental development, and actually applying these controls, because all this is about is making sure that in your processes that your developers follow, in the workflow, in your engineering teams, that you're capturing these requirements and ensuring that they're fulfilled, and at the end that you're basically testing those requirements as well and actually saying, are they being met? Very, very briefly, what I'm saying here is, if you think about any system, you have functional and non-functional requirements. So functional requirements, I expect the system to allow me to do a query on this database and give me a response. I expect the system to do A, B, and C. And you've got your non-functional requirements. I expect all data at rest to be whole disk encrypted. I expect multi-factor authentication. Well, equally, what we're asking for here is, let's have those functional and non-functional requirements from a responsible AI perspective as well. There is an awful lot to say about this. You can see there's quite a few controls in A6, and then they map very, very, very well to those that you see in A8, particularly the whole area of the software development lifecycle in Annex A. So my point being is, if you've got to the point where you've got effective, secure software development life cycles, if you've reached that level of maturity, it's not a huge leap, in my view, to be able to incorporate those AI points as well. And then, Nathalie, do you want to add on the development life cycle?
No, the development life cycle, I see in a lot of organizations, the AI development as the new sexy thing on the block. So I see a lot of organizations hopping on the train and need to do something with AI, where they seem that all the necessary controls that we already had implemented from a security perspective don't seem so relevant anymore, because they want to be the first mover. So I do think that secure supplier, that secure development life cycle, having that incorporated as well, needs to be embedded. And I think a lot of organizations, it will help to have that in place. And indeed, as Graham says, there's a lot of things that need to be covered in that secure development life cycle that needs to be fleshed out with the developers in the organization. So for me, there's a lot of work that can be done.
Yeah, I think also as well, pulling in the right experts into those development teams as well. Where I think we want to get to is, rather than the development teams having to go off and check every 5 minutes, is this okay, is that okay? Essentially, a bit like we've done in the world of security with the concept of shift left. Some of you may be familiar with that, where we've tried to make security a developer responsibility, obviously giving them the support and the skills and the resources to do it. I think that's the road we're going to probably have to go through here as well. So ensuring that we are training developers, giving them the support they need, giving them the guardrails so they can get on with their job and produce products and innovate and all of that good stuff, but within a set of guardrails, and understanding that, yeah, it's front and center of their role as much as anybody else. I think is important. And that probably leads in nicely to the last one I wanted to draw your attention to for now, and that is, I alluded to it a little bit earlier on, that in an AI lifecycle, there are different parties, customers and suppliers. In this case, I've chosen to focus on suppliers. So let's say we're let's take the client I work with, for example. So they develop an AI solution, but they are using a cloud service provider for the infrastructure behind that. They're using some large language models produced by somebody else. So let's just say they are reliant very much on their suppliers. And like anything else, this client I'm speaking about has to be able to show that they understand what they're buying from their suppliers, that they've done their risk assessment and due diligence on the supply chain, that what those suppliers are providing meets their obligations from a legal and regulatory point of view, that those suppliers are indeed living up to essentially what my customer would expect. But the good thing is they already have a supplier due diligence process in place because they already have ISO 27001 in place and some of the controls in A5, so sort of 519 through to 23, all talk about having a supply chain management policy, having a supplier onboarding process, a risk assessment process, and validating that our agreements are fit for purpose and so forth. So again, what we're doing right now with that particular customer is we're not reinventing the wheel and coming up with a new process, but we're having a look at the moment, especially at the due diligence questionnaires we're being asking these suppliers to fill in. We're also having a look at the kind of certifications we've been asking of these suppliers and other such things, and seeing if we can extend it where appropriate, where relevant, to include AI requirements as well, so especially for our what we call tier 1 suppliers. So again, if what I'm getting to here is if you're doing the right things already with 27001 and 2, many parts of the annex are being addressed. Now, I realise that, we're 5 minutes from the end, and I realise there's an awful lot more I could say about those controls. I mean, literally, we could spend a couple of hours working our way through just the ones I've shown on the slide here. So I've been quite high level in the description. What I would encourage you to do, if you have time, is just to take a look, see whether you agree with the mappings that I've put in there, and I'm sure you'll find that those overlap really, really well. So what am I telling you in a nutshell is that if we get ISO 27001 and 2 well established, you're on the journey already to address quite a few of the requirements in, or controls I should say, in 42001. But I think, Nathalie, do you want to add something there before we move into questions and answers?
Yeah, as you stated, I can add a lot of things that need attention, but I think I'll leave the time to the audience to ask any questions that are that they want to ask at this moment.
Thank you, Nathalie and Graham, for delivering this highly informative webinar. We have taken a lot of questions. I don't think that we will have time to address them all, but we'll pick a few. So let's start with the first one. Could you give an indication of existing ISO IEC 42001 certification activities in the UK or Belgium?
Well, I'll just be totally honest with you for now from a UK point of view, sorry. I am not yet aware of any company yet being certified. I can talk about a couple that I'm working with who are implementing, who have an intent to be certified in the second quarter of next year. That's probably all I can tell you. Now, that's just to caveat that I don't work obviously with every certification body there is here, but I think it's certainly for the UK very, very early days, but still very promising.
Yeah, and the same goes for Belgium. Not all certification bodies are already accredited to do the certification, and it's still early days in adoption for the ISO 42001 standard. So it's only for also a couple of companies that are like really first movers and that want to adhere to the EU AI legislation and that want to showcase that. But again, it's also very early days. So I'm not aware of any organization in Belgium that has received the certification.
Okay. Another question asks, how much do these ISO IEC standards cover the EU AI Act requirements?
So do you want to take that, Nathalie, or do you want me to?
I'll add if I have something.
Yeah, happy to. Yeah, it's a good question, and that came up. Funny enough, I was delivering a workshop this morning on the EU AI Act, and that came up. And obviously, I might sound like a politician when I try and answer this, but the issue is with legislation. a lot of legislation is not explicitly prescriptive, if you like. So if you look at the EU AI Act, there's a huge amount of what we call recitals, which are the guidance, and articles, which are the specific requirements. However, when we look at it, the need to have, for high-risk systems, the need to have clear documentation to address transparency, to conduct a system impact assessment, to report incidents. All of the things that I would call highlights of the EU AI Act are covered by ISO 42001. All of those, the big things, the big ticket items that the EU AI Act asks you to have, 42001 also asks you to have. That's not to say that implementing 42001 makes you 100% compliant. It doesn't, because obviously there's a way in which you implement it. But let me put it this way. In my view, if you implement 42001, it's going to give you the foundation to cover off, in my opinion, the vast majority of the general requirements, I would argue.
Yeah, I would agree. And the only thing that I want to add to that as well, the AI Commission will also, like with DORA, make sure that you will get some implementing guidelines from a legislative point of view as well. So I do think if you already start with the ISO 42001, you will already have like 80–90% covered, and then the small bits and pieces that they want from a legislative point of view are simply things that you will be able to add on very quickly, very easily, and without a lot of pain that you need to go through.
Thank you. How can we certify to ISO 42001 when the ISO has not published ISO 42005 AISIA guidance?
Yeah, I can. Remember, there's a relatively easy answer to that question, which is the 42005, which you're alluding to there, is indeed a guidance document. So you're right, that guidance document is in draft at the moment. That's the guidance document on how to perform AI system impact assessments. But remember, when you implement a management system and go for certification and the auditor audits you, the auditor isn't auditing you against 42005 or any other guidance document. The auditor is auditing you against the specific requirements in ISO 42001. So it's still possible to do an AI system impact assessment like the standard tells you to without using the 42005 guidance, and still possible to get certified. Now, do I recommend that? That's a separate question. My answer is no. I'd recommend as an implementer that you possibly, if you can, you hang fire, you use that guidance. But technically speaking, what I'm trying to argue is, even if guidance has not yet been produced or finished by ISO, it doesn't mean that an auditor cannot audit you against the explicit requirements of 42001. Again, Nathalie.
I agree, and there is the guidance, of course, but there are other impact assessments available that have been published in relation to AI systems, so you can also leverage those. So there's no specific need to per se look at those guidance documents, because that's all they are, guidance documents. That doesn't mean that they don't have any added value. They certainly do, but there is already a lot of out there that you can also use to ensure that you align to that as well.
Yeah, thinking about that, just thinking off the fly, the NIST AI risk management framework might be a good place to start, and that's completely free as well. So if you look up NIST AI RMF, that might help you as well.
Thank you. Another question asks, can you share your opinion on how these standards can be integrated with an existing ISO 31000 risk management framework?
Nathalie, you want to have a stab at that one?
Again, it's a risk management approach. You already have something in place, so you shouldn't be reinventing the wheel. Start with the basis that you already have, and add on whatever you want to implement with the 42001. You shouldn't. You might need to add something like an impact assessment that is a little bit different. But per se, the approach of having a risk management approach isn't different from a standard that you're already using. So I would just leverage what you already have and try to tweak it to the needs that you would have with regards to a new standard.
Yeah, and I think as well, if you look at all the stuff that 31,000 asks you to do, and then you go and take a look at clauses 6 and clauses 8 in 42001, a lot of the language there is very, very similar, and that's quite deliberate. All the risk management sections of all the common management systems are based on the principles that 31,000 asks you to talk about. Where you get the difference, as Nathalie's kind of said, is more on the sort of the technical side, but the actual ensuring you have a process, if you've got that, you can easily extend it to include AI-related risks.
Thank you. And one last question. Does the design and development of AI systems include specific input, output, review, verification, and validation requirements? If so, where is this stated?
Okay. Yeah, so the general requirements you'll find in A6 in the annex. If you look at 42001, so you look at A6, but there's not. You won't find specific instructions on, you must produce this kind of design document. You must test in this particular way. But it does, if you read the principles or the controls in A6, require you at each stage to capture, document and define your functional and non-functional requirements to ensure that those requirements are embedded, and prior to the release of any product, ensure that the product is tested to verify that those requirements are being met. But if you're looking for sort of technical detail, sort of technical components, then some of the technical terminology you'll find in another standard, and I'm sure it's the 22989, ISO 22989 gives you a lot of technical terminology. But yeah, the requirements for having a robust life cycle is in A6, but again, it's not prescriptive, and that's quite deliberate because ISO standards stop short of being overly prescriptive in that case.
Thank you, Nathalie. Thank you, Graham, for delivering this amazing webinar. The audience, please be informed that this session has been recorded and will be posted on our website and YouTube channel along with the slides of the presentation. We wish you happy holidays ahead and see you again next year. Thank you all.